Is Saving Winslow by Sharon Creech, Chapter 4, starting on page 12. And I'm Beth Slikson, a resource teacher, and I'll be reading you Chapter 4, 5, and 6, I believe. Next door lived Louie's friend Mac, whose father owned the feed store. Louie had been in the feed store many times, helping Mac stock shelves, so he was familiar with the layout. He could direct customers to the cow halters, the livestock feed bins, the portable cages, and tick repellent and vitamin supplements for animals of all types, and to books on every farm animal, from pigs to donkeys. Mac was there when Louie and his father arrived. They told him about the donkey and chose a suitable powdered milk formula. A small bag, Louie's father said, because it probably won't live very. Yes, it will, Louie said. Don't say that. Mac recommended a book all about donkeys, but Louie's father said they should get it from the library because, what will we need it for if the donkey, don't say it, think positive. That was pretty much how it was with the few items his father accepted. The smallest bottle, the smallest bag of formula, the tiniest vial of vitamins, the 2-page free pamphlet titled The Newborn Donkey, instead of the 200-page book all about donkeys, because he was convinced this would all be wasted on the pitiful donkey. His father did not want to buy a bale of hay for bedding, but Mac's dad offered to throw in a partial bale for free because it had fallen off someone's truck. We're going to feel pretty stupid, his father said, if we get home and find a dead donkey. Quit saying that. I just don't want you to get your hopes up. Chapter 5, Mac and the Sisters. Mac was 13, 3 years older than Louie. People sometimes thought they were related because they were often together, and both had dark, unruly hair and dark eyes and were tall and thin. Louie's own brother Gus shared Louie's dark features, but had their father's strong, stocky build. He had played football in high school and had been eager to join the army. Louie missed him. He sometimes missed Mac, too, because lately Mac had been hanging out with his friends from school when he wasn't helping at the feed store. If Louie suggested sledding down the hill at the end of the road, Mac sometimes said, I'm a teenager now. Don't feel like sledding. But other times, if there was no one else around, he might join Louie and laugh his head off all the way down the hill. It was while they were sledding that day that they had met the sisters, Claudine and Nora, who had recently moved to town and were the only other ones at the hill that day. It was late Sunday afternoon, and the snow was packed and icy in spots. Later, Louie couldn't remember how it was that he and Mac learned their names and where they lived, and that Claudine was Mac's age and Nora was a year younger than Louie. It was all a blur, the way Mac and Claudine started talking and laughing, while Nora and Louie kept on sledding down the hill, walking back up and sledding down again. On the way home, just the two of them, Louie and Mac put his hand over his heart and said, I am in love. He pretended to stagger and fall back in the snow. Chapter 6, Donkey, Donkey, It's Okay. When Louie and his father returned from the feed store, his mother was still cuddling the donkey, snuggling him in a blanket, stroking his head, and talking to him. Donkey, donkey, it's okay. Louie set up a place for Winslow in the cellar, with hay for bedding and blankets for extra warmth. Winslow was bleating pitifully, those little pleas, please, please, please. Winslow did not know what to do with the bottle of milk. He repeatedly bumped his nose against the nipple, and when he got it in his mouth, he spit it out. When it finally stayed in his mouth, he didn't know how to suck on it. Louie stayed with Winslow, holding him, talking with him, petting him, coaxing him to drink. He dripped milk onto his finger and slipped his finger into Winslow's mouth. Winslow sucked on it eagerly. Louis repeated that until Winslow accepted the bottle. Success! But it had taken 2 hours to coax an ounce of milk into Winslow, and then Winslow fell asleep. Louis, too, fell asleep, holding the blanket wrapped, pitiful Winslow. When Louis was born, he was 2 months early and weighed only 3 pounds. He didn't like to see photos of himself from when he was such a scrawny bird-like thing, hooked up to tubes and housed in an incubator. He looked helpless. Sometimes Louis thought that he could remember those early days. He knew that was unlikely, but often when he was falling asleep or waking up, he felt as if he'd been gasping for breath, and then suddenly his mouth opened wide and a rush of cool, clean air came in, and he expanded like a balloon, and he floated up and out of an incubator and into the world. And such a world it was, full of blue sky and trees heavy with leaves, every shade of green, and birds swooping and diving and chirping, and yellow tulips waving. Louis was thinking about this when he fell asleep holding the pitiful donkey, and when he awoke a few hours later, he felt that rush of cool, clean air. But something was different. He did not feel floaty. There was the donkey, limp against his chest. Louis rubbed him with the blanket, begging Winslow to stay alive. Please, please. Winslow's legs twitched. His eyes opened briefly and then closed again. Louis urged the donkey to take more milk. Please, Winslow, please. And he wondered, had his parents begged him to stay alive? Did they hover over him like he was hovering over Winslow? Did they urge him to keep breathing? Did they pat him and talk to him? And did that help him? In 2 weeks, winter break would be over and Louis would have to return to school. He hadn't thought about what he would do with Winslow when that time came. How would he get frequent feedings? His mother said, "Oh, don't worry about that. We don't even know if Winslow will be." Don't say it. And that is the end of chapter 6. Hope you enjoyed reading.